I'm Meredith Cohen, and I'm an architectural historian specializing in medieval architecture. Today, I'll be breaking down the interiors of famous castles in Disney films. This is the Sleeping Beauty throne room. Here's everything that jumps out to me. I see columns with capitals suggesting a great vault in the middle there. I see in the middle ground a narrow wall that's accentuated. I see gables and pinnacles, very tall thrones, a canopy over the thrones with a coat of arms. To either side, I see these aisles extending into the back behind the thrones and lancet windows with stained glass. On the Capitol here, I see a fleur-de-lis symbol. There's another fleur-de-lis symbol over here. And we know that Sleeping Beauty takes place in the 14th century. They actually tell us in the movie.
Now, Father, you're living in the past. This is the 14th century.
I'm a specialist of 13th and 14th century architecture. And what I see here actually is not that. It's what we call medievalism. Medievalism is a kind of imagined recreation of the Middle Ages, where one is pulling from different medieval time periods and accurate and inaccurate aspects. One of the most inaccurate things here, and the thing that we associate with the Middle Ages most, is just how dark and gray this space is, and that the walls are left bare. That is completely inaccurate. Originally, in the Middle Ages, these walls would be plastered, painted, and then covered with either frescoes or with tapestries. And even the columns and capitals would have been painted in bright colors. A throne room is traditionally a hall of justice, where the king and the queen sit in state, ruling on trials, ruling on questions. In this scene, they're announcing the birth of their new daughter, which probably wouldn't have happened in real life. The birth of a child is an important thing, but they didn't really want daughters, right? They wanted sons. In the 13th and 14th century, a typical way of covering a roof was through stone cross-rib vaults, like we see here. A Gothic vaulted roof is a stone roof that covers the entire space, and the vault refers to the stonework that's actually covering that wide space. The one we're looking at here is using a quadripartite rib vault. That means you have two ribs crossing to create four spaces that is filled in with stones called webbing. Pointed arches are typical of Gothic architecture because the point is more structurally stable than a rounded arch. Tracery is decorative work in stone that makes it look kind of like lace, and it can be really beautiful. Here we're looking at a sexfoil tracery oculus, 6 petals on the right side. In another shot, you can see this door is decorated with a tracery gable that extends upward with these repeated floral motifs. These windows here are very typical of the Gothic period, and they remind me of those at the Sainte-Chapelle. Lancet windows are very tall, narrow windows in the shape of a keyhole. This lattice work or diamond pattern feels very kind of 1950s or Harlequin-like, not typical to the Middle Ages. Stained glass actually is predominantly blue and red, deeply colored glass, not pinks and greens and light blues. Sleeping Beauty is, of course, a fantasy film, and they're trying to pull together a lot of these beautiful ideas and images to create a fantasy world, but they are drawing from a lot of medieval sources and in a way that is highly inaccurate, and that's what we call medievalism. Here's a scene of coronation in Frozen. It looks to be taking place inside a chapel. I see lancet windows on the first level, covered with a kind of gable frame. We see posts like piers that are holding up some kind of wooden arch. I see some decoration here, cross-like decoration, arcading, and then we see on a gallery level up above these upper windows, a choir singing. There is another kind of hybrid or mishmash in the architecture here is not only do we have a kind of all the Scandinavian motifs, but then we have these European Gothic elements of the windows with the gable frames. The fact that this architectural space is made of wood tells me that it's probably taking place in Scandinavia. This space seems to be drawing from stave church architecture that we also see in Scandinavia and in particular in Norway. This is Arendal Castle, and it looks very much like a stave church. Stave churches are so called because they're made with staves, which are pieces of wood that are beveled to fit together, kind of like a wine barrel or a whiskey barrel. The stave church is a type of architecture that goes back to the early Middle Ages, to the Great Viking Age, and we see these cross motifs, which are called Andreaskreuze in Swedish, or the St. Andrew's cross. It's a decorative motif. The detailing in Frozen is very similar to the church we see here, with the use of the St. Andrew's cross and the elaborate architectural detailing. In the interior, we see it's painted with flowers and scroll work, usually of a floral motif, which is very typical of 18th century Scandinavian painting. But this space is definitely an older space, so it's referring to the fact that this family has had this castle for a very long time. Now we're going to talk about the staircase in Cinderella. This is crazy. This is an amazing staircase, but definitely not like any staircase I've seen in a castle before. Here's everything that jumps out to me. We have these great big arches with windows and great huge curtains and this enormous staircase that kind of funnels down into this bridge-like aspect, and then it fans open, and then in front here we have some kind of a vase with a very Baroque kind of handle. Immediately to me this just looks like the kind of 1950s debutante ball space, or like this Hollywood red carpet style Cannes staircase. What it does remind me of is the grand staircase that's in the Palais Garnier in Paris that was built in the 19th century, when we have this notion of public life and everyone goes to the opera to see the opera, but also to be seen. These staircases were really designed to show the public and show the people there each other, to show their dresses, to meet up with people on this grand staircase. Most interior medieval staircases were very narrow. They were primarily used as practical passageways, and that helped really the builders get around the different spaces that they need to construct. Or sometimes royal bedrooms would have these little tiny staircases behind the bed so the king could go visit his mistresses in secret. If we were going to talk about an opulent staircase in a castle, one that comes to mind is that at the Chateau de Chambord in France. This is a really special staircase designed by Leonardo da Vinci. This staircase is innovative because it has a double helix spiral. So we would see really grand staircases on the exterior of palaces or castles. One that comes to mind is at the Palais de la Cité in Paris, whose staircase goes back to the 13th century. And this kind of exterior massive grand staircases are for the reception of ambassadors and special people. And it also brought people from the ground level up to the piano nobile, the noble level, where special people met each other, right? Royalty, high dignity, ambassadors, not the riffraff of everyday life who stayed on the ground floor. These staircases are all over Disney movies. You see them in Cinderella, you see it in Beauty and the Beast, you see it in Frozen. It seems to be pure fantasy. I haven't seen anything like this in a castle. So for Cinderella, I'm not really sure what date this takes place in, but it seems to be very much aligned with the idea of fantasy, that it's drawing from many different sources and many different time periods to create this imagined, wonderful, exceptional space of dreams. Now we're going to talk about the library in Beauty and the Beast. Here's everything that jumps out to me. Yeah, this is a kind of library that one would see in a palace or castle or aristocratic household. There are a couple libraries that come to mind here: the Vienna National Library in Austria, the Biblioteca Comunale di Imola in Italy, and the Library of St. Gall in Switzerland. They are just extremely Baroque, very highly decorated, beautiful spaces to find yourself in and to read. I see neoclassical tapered columns. I see this little balustrade here. I see a fancy spiral staircase here, floor-to-ceiling books. We know that Disney was referencing the Baroque style. There's even a line in Beauty and the Beast where Cogsworth says,
"If it's not Baroque, don't fix it."
These round globes were common features in libraries, a sign that you understand the world, that you know the world, and that you will dominate the world. The Vienna National Library even has a whole collection of globes. The tapered columns in Beauty and the Beast look like the tapered columns I see at the library in Imola. If you have a spiral staircase like this in your house, it's not the most direct way to the upper parts of your shelves, so they're really purely decorative. This church, Saint-Étienne-du-Mont in Paris, has these amazing stone spiral staircases from the end of the 15th century. The only thing that is definitely inaccurate is this fireplace. Book collections like this were incredibly expensive. You wouldn't have a fireplace in the middle of your library that could potentially burn them all. Well, this is somewhat accurate for the time period to have a library like this, but what we know about Beast is that Beast was illiterate.
Why don't you read it to me?
I can't.
You mean you never learned?
So what they're trying to say is that there's something behind Beast referencing his family's great wealth, their longevity over the centuries, and that there is a high level of culture and education in his household. The Disney creators are really drawing from popular culture and what people imagine about the past. If you want to see some incredible castle or palace interiors, there's obviously Versailles, but if you have the chance, also go to Vaux-le-Vicomte, which is nearby in Paris, which preceded Versailles and is made by the same architect and designers.